Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of M365 Voice. I'm Antonio Mayo, and we have Sarah.
I'm Sarah Halsey.
And I am Mike Milani.
Great, and welcome back, everyone. We've got another great podcast for you today. We're doing another wine and beer tasting episode today. We're actually going to turn this one into a bit of a drinking game. Every time we say 365, we need to take a drink.
Oh boy.
Run out of wine or beer.
Running low, so I've been saying a lot of 365 before we started recording, I guess.
Oh my goodness.
We'll see where this goes.
Yes, it'll be a lot of fun for sure. All right, so we're going to take another question at large. Maybe we should point out, Antonio, for those people who are listening to our podcast, that they can go online to m365voice.com and submit a question if you would have a question that you'd like to be included.
And you said 365, so we got to take a drink.
That'll have a lot of positive returns there, Antonio, for sure. Are we ready?
Yes, we're ready.
Sorry, I got to raise up the cup. All right, here we go. Oh, this is a good one. All right. What to use when? When should you use a Teams private channel versus a Yammer Community versus a SharePoint site?
Teams private channel versus a Yammer Community versus a, what was the last one?
SharePoint site.
A SharePoint site. Okay. That is a great question.
Mike is thinking, you could see his eyes going all the way around the world on that one.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so private channel, my favorite topic.
Why don't we start there, Mike?
So from a private channel perspective, there are some conditions or prerequisites before you can create a private channel. Obviously, we're going to assume that private channels are enabled on your tenant and you allow owners and members maybe to create a private channel. So once those conditions are met, there are more conditions within the actual team that you can do to allow you to create private channel. So to create a private channel, you have to add members to that channel, and to add members to that channel, they have to be made members of the team. So you cannot include other users, even guests, if they're not part of the actual team membership. So that is the biggest rule, that you cannot have members from outside the team accessing the private channel.
So what would be a good use case for why I would want to create a Teams private channel?
Basically, if I have a team and we have a lot of members in there, let's take, for example, a project-based team or a business unit-based team, and you need to collaborate or share documents within a specific subset of those membership, but you don't want to step outside of the team, actually. So I have a team with 50 members, and there are 5 executives as a good example on that team. We don't want to create another team for them. We create a private channel, and we all add those 5 executives to that channel because they want to talk about maybe financial things, maybe some decisions. They want to keep it outside of the conversation of the rest of the people. And they want to just collaborate on specific documents that are confidential and they should not be shared with the rest of the team. Then you create a private channel like that.
And I think that that's really key, because we're not talking about just putting files in a separate folder, right? Because this is a secured private channel. Other people can't see it. It's where you would take your confidential documents or your confidential collaboration for just a subset of team members.
Yeah. Yes, so it creates a separate site collection, is a dumbed down version of a team site, and it has a different site template code as well. So it is team. I don't have to double check that team site or hash. I don't remember. It has a different code, but again, it creates a separate site collection, so it secures the actual membership.
Okay, so that's what the Teams private channel is, and maybe we should step through this when we talk about what to use when, a Teams private channel versus a Yammer Community versus a SharePoint site. Maybe we should start by covering each of the 3 individually, and then we can kind of loop back. So a Yammer Community. We've talked about Yammer before, so are you okay if I just jump in and talk about Yammer communities? So in general, when you create a Yammer community, you're either going to create that as a public or a private community. A public Yammer community would be open to be searchable, and anyone in your organization or in your tenant could join that Yammer community. So we're going to be open about it. So it could be, for example, a Yammer community for your help desk, and anyone can join it. Anyone can read the messages that are posted to that Yammer community. I could create a private Yammer community that's maybe just for my IT department, and then people could request to join that community. I could search my Yammer communities and I would see it, but I would have to submit a request to join it, and that would have to be approved, and only then can I see the posts in that Yammer community. You can also create a super private or a secret Yammer community, which is not only private, but it's unlisted, meaning that you can't even find it in search. It really is an invitation only private Yammer community. So those are your 3 kinds of Yammer communities. Again, completely open to everybody in your organization. That would be a public, then a private, which is you have to join it and be approved to join before you can see the content. And then the super private, which is basically it's unlisted. You have to be invited to join.
And I like to, when what you just described with Yammer communities and the level of public, private, and super private, I like to think about that as them being discoverable versus not.
Right.
Does that make sense? That kind of thinking of it in those terms?
Right.
Okay.
So we talked about Teams private channels and Yammer communities. SharePoint sites could mean anything. Yeah.
So we all know SharePoint sites very well. We know how SharePoint permissions are managed. You know, default groups that are there, owners, members, visitors. You control who has access, who's a member of those groups, and therefore who has access to the site, and the various levels of access. So personally, I find with SharePoint sites, you get more granular access control. Because I can have a visitors group that only has read only. I can exclude people. I can get very specific with custom permission levels if I wish. So if we're talking about, like, with private teams and private Yammer communities and SharePoint, we're talking kind of to some degree about access control across those. So when you do have sensitive information or sensitive discussions, sensitive topics, we're talking about who has access to those by controlling on the SharePoint side through permissions.
Oh, Mike, I think you might be on mute.
I was on mute for some reason. How did that? I don't know.
It was a deep thought.
I'm just going to keep my hands
share it again.
Back here. What was I saying? So yeah, from that perspective, if you go back to the private channel, it creates that site collection for you. You can, if you want to step outside the box, you can also add people to that lead visitor group in that private or that site collection. I don't know if there's a use case for that, because the reason we create a private channel is just because we want to secure it more. So this is where you start crossing over between a private channel and a SharePoint site that is this common place where you can extend the access to a SharePoint site for the private channel to other visitors group if you want to, or other people in the visitors group.
So here is where it gets mind-bending, because SharePoint sites are closely tied into Teams. So clearly when you're creating a private Teams channel, it's already creating a separate SharePoint site collection on the back end. But I think the nature of this question was more a separate SharePoint site for the need of sharing things versus a Teams private channel versus the Yammer community. And ultimately, how do you decide? So if you're meeting with one of your clients, how do you tell them what to use when? Is it based on the type of content, or what's easiest to spin up or maintain, or usability?
So for me, it would be, I would kind of drive it from the perspective of what's the purpose of this private repository, right? Like if I generalize those three and I think of it just as a private place or workspace to collaborate, what's the real driver or need for it? Because I think about, like, if I go the SharePoint site route, I have a lot of control over what I want to do, over who has access, over who doesn't have access. I have a lot of control over how I structure it or the services that I can enable within that SharePoint site. If I go the Teams private channel route, right, it does create a SharePoint site collection behind the scenes, but it is a special site collection. And there is a background process running that will reset many of the customizations you might go to the SharePoint site and actually do. So I have less options for control, I find. So Mike, to your point, like I thought that if you went to this is where I could be wrong and don't know enough. If I went to the SharePoint site behind a Teams private channel, and I added some people with read-only access, that those would be if I had people to the visitors group, that would be removed. Right? I thought that automated process that resets the SharePoint site collection for a private channel would actually remove that. I could be wrong though.
I know for a fact that the membership, like if you are a member or an owner, that the membership will definitely get reset after 4 hours. I'm not too sure about the visitors group. I think the visitors group, the actual, from a Teams side, it does not have this visitors group or this visitors membership that you can manage from Teams.
Yeah.
So it's either you are a member or an owner. So it does not get into the visitors group on the SharePoint side.
Yeah. So back to your question, Sarah. Again, I would drive it for what's the purpose of this private place they're going to collaborate in, and how does the company or the organization collaborate on a regular basis? Like if they are full on Teams and they use Teams for everything, and that's the way they work day to day, I would probably recommend the private channel within a team, because that's what they're used to using, and that's what they probably have processes set up around. You know, if they're not SharePoint people, I probably wouldn't recommend, oh, go do this in a SharePoint site, because you're already working and being productive in Teams. But if you have some custom need around it that needs some additional configuration, I'd probably go the SharePoint site route.
Yeah, and I think if you want to compare, we can more compare the actual Yammer private group and then the private channel, because they have a lot of common things such as conversations and chats and collaborating on specific topic, where from a Teams perspective, you can do a lot more co-authoring. The file accessibility to the files is a lot easier than going into the Yammer side, even though you can upload files in Yammer and it goes into SharePoint. But from an accessibility or from an ease of use perspective, Team is much easier to go and access your files rather than a Yammer community.
Yeah, and I think an easy way to differentiate between a Teams private channel and a Yammer community, and let's say even a private Yammer community, is that it wouldn't make sense to create, I don't think, Mike, I want you to check me on this, it wouldn't make sense to create a team in order to create a Teams private channel. Meaning a Teams private channel only makes sense if you have a larger team and then you have a need to have a private channel area within that team. Meaning you have to have a team need first. If what you really want is a place to be able to have conversations and you want them to be restricted to only people that you approve, and you don't already have a team of which you want that subset to come from, then maybe Yammer might be a great choice for you if you're using Yammer, because it's quite frankly less steps to create that Yammer private community.
And to that point, it's either, if that is the case, then just create a team or a Yammer community. Don't create a team and then create a private channel underneath it, because it makes no sense.
Correct. You don't need a private channel if everyone in your team is in fact who you would put in the private channel.
Yeah,
very true.
Yeah, agreed.
So we answered that one pretty quickly.
Yeah, I just want to follow up that the actual site collection template for the private channel is team channel #0. So I had to kind of look it up and remember that was it.
Yeah, we did answer that quite quickly, actually. That was a good one. I do want to ask one question, though. Do you see people starting to use private channels? Is that something that's entering the conversation today?
I just did one not long ago. It was an online workshop, actually, for a group of doctors that they wanted to collaborate online for a workshop, and they wanted to have different breakout rooms, and they did not want everyone to go into all the breakout rooms. So one of the use case I had is each breakout room would be a private channel, because they wanted to store specific documents that specific people would be able to access them only and collaborate only on those documents. So that was a very good use case for a private channel.
Yeah, that's a great example.
So Mike, I have a question. At the very beginning of this podcast, you said that before you can create Teams private channels, they have to be enabled. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like? So is that actually a high-level setting that is by default turned off in Teams that you would have to enable?
They are turned on by default in Teams, and you have the ability to go turn it off. A lot of organizations have turned it off right away just because they wanted to get around what private channel is and explain the private channels to the users. But yes, it is a global setting. So once you turn it off, no one has access to create private channels. But if it is turned on and the team owners and members can create a private channel, unless the actual team owner go and uncheck the checkbox and say, no, I don't want members to create a private channel.
Within that team. So every team, the owners of that team could say no private channels here for this team.
That's correct.
Interesting.
Okay, and let me follow up that question with one more. Have you seen heavy usage of Yammer private groups or private communities? Because I haven't seen very much. I've seen Yammer used when you really want broad-based communications across most of the organization or large groups of people. Rarely do I actually see it used in private communities. Have you guys seen that?
I have actually seen it, and I've talked to quite a few different people who have Yammer enabled at their organizations that use it. And here's a great use case for it. When they have something that is not work related or that may be a sensitive topic. So a lot of companies have employee resource groups or they have special interest groups. And those special interest groups could be a lot of different groups, right? It could be women of IT, but it could also be faith-based groups. And a lot of times your HR or employee relations departments may have decided opinions as to whether or not those groups should be public. Simply because in Yammer, if those groups are public and you post an announcement in that group, it can actually send out email notifications to people who might follow that group. And sometimes they just want those groups to be marked as private so that people can join them. But then the content from those groups is basically staying contained within those groups and that you don't have any, it's not the right phrase, but spillover or accidental spillover of content. That is one of the most common use cases that I hear that a lot of companies use those private groups for in Yammer.
That's a great use case, actually. I hadn't thought of that.
I like that.
Yeah. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
And our drinking game actually didn't work that well, so I'm going to say Microsoft 365.
Oh,
Perfect.
It's a perfect way to end an episode.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. That was a great topic today. Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good one, everybody.